I'm Haley Hetrick, the state capitol reporter with News 9 in Oklahoma City. The legislative session ended about a week ago, and we got to sit down with the governor today to talk about a whole list of things. Here's that full conversation between Governor Stitt and I. So just to start, talk to me about your thoughts on this session as a whole, kind of some highs and lows.
Yeah, first off, I think it was one of the best sessions we've had in my 7 years from a policy standpoint. So the big policy wins, we obviously got a 1/4 point tax cut for all Oklahomans, which is important. And then we flattened the bracket. So even the people on the lower income brackets literally got some of their taxes totally removed, which was great. We got business courts done, which is a huge win for the business community and being a business-friendly state. Behind the meter is a huge one. And then we eliminated the income tax over time, which is really important that as we have excess revenue, when revenue goes up, we can modestly grow expenses, but we can't grow expenses wildly like we've done in the past. So it'll put a governor or a limit on the expense side, and we'll be able to eliminate income tax over time. Tennessee did this. Now Tennessee has a 0 income tax. And so really excited about just to continue the momentum that I've created over the last 7 years with a business-friendly state. So overall, it was great. Tort reform, we capped non-economic damages, which is also great for bringing more doctors into Oklahoma, more access to health care, which is really important when I talk to Oklahomans across the state.
And then as you go into next year, it'll be the second session. So is there any ideas you feel like you would like to see transfer into 2026? Anything that you don't feel like the legislature, followed through on?
There's a couple things. First off, in my state of the state, my big 3 priorities we got done. So I was really thankful we got those accomplished, and it was a conservative session. Some of the things that we didn't get done that I'm always focused on, like asset seizure, okay? Forfeiture of civil asset seizures, what it's called. Most people don't know what this is, but if you've been pulled over for some reason and even though you're not charged with a crime or you're not convicted of a crime, the law enforcement can take your truck, can take your vehicle, can take your, in some cases, cash that you had, and suspect that you were involved with a crime. And listen, I don't want to limit law enforcement if they have to have the ability to enforce, and obviously if there's drug trades, we want to take that asset out of the equation. But there's also another side of that. If you're acquitted or you're found not guilty, they got to give their stuff back. And right now, that is a huge issue, and there's some abuse in that system. And so I would love to see that finished up. Fines, fees, and court cost is something that I'm always working on. We passed a bill this year that limited that. And, we have to fund our court system, but we should not fund the court system over people, off of the backs of people after they've served their time and they're trying to get back on their feet, and they're trying to get their kids back, and they're trying to provide for their families, and we shouldn't saddle them with all this tremendous debt.
And then next year will be your last session. So do you see sports betting getting done before you leave this building?
I hope it gets done, but it needs to get done as a free market approach. It needs to get done that, it's a commercial license. Just like we don't limit how many gas stations you can have in Oklahoma, or we don't limit how many, just name the industry. So why don't we just set this up that anybody that wants to apply and wants to operate a sports book would have that ability, right? So that's a free market approach. And in my approach, the state was going to make a lot of money. And I want to maximize that license, right? We wanted to charge $500,000 if you wanted to set up a sports book. Other states charge that much. And then the state of Oklahoma should get 20% of that revenue. The bill that was proposed by one of the legislators this year had no fee up front, and it was just giving it away to only the tribes. And that's the problem with these type of bills. So again, I hope it's a free market approach, but I'm not going to just pick winners and losers and set up a special deal for one special interest group.
And then kind of on that note, the House settlement was agreed upon over the weekend to allow schools to directly pay players for NIL. What does this mean for the state? I mean, OU and OSU have already come out saying they're planning on doing this. How does this advance the state in the sports realm?
You're talking about well, I haven't studied that a lot, how that's going to have some repercussions, but generally, you know, we're supportive of NIL. We think players should be able to monetize their efforts for sure. What I think most fans really are disappointed with is the transfer portal, right? When people can just transfer at the drop of a hat, it's really disrupting college athletics, and there needs to be some parameters around that. But in the effort to compete in the SEC and the Big 12, I know we're trying to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak, and make sure that we can attract the best players at OU and OSU and the different schools. So generally I'm okay with it, but we need to figure out how do we make sure that it's a contract and it goes both ways, right? It doesn't just give money to a player and allow them to jump ship anytime and just go to the highest bidder all over the country.
So do you see maybe some state legislation in the future of kind of making sure we're on top of that?
You know, I'd signed an executive order, and that was a request from the athletic departments at OU and OSU, and they've kind of codified that bill here. But sure, if the NCAA, if the SEC, if the Big 12, if they need further legislation or clarification from a state perspective, or if the athletic department at OU or OSU needs us to do something else, I know that the legislature would be happy to get that done, and so would I.
And then kind of back to this session, you vetoed more bills this session than any governor before you. Talk about kind of why you did that. Any specific bills that were overridden that you were just not happy about? Sure,
yeah. So first off, for Oklahomans to understand, I think it's ridiculous how many bills are introduced every year. So Oklahomans need to understand this, but there were 616 bills that hit my desk. 616, right? Why? How can there be 616 new things to saddle Oklahomans with, new rules and laws and blah, blah, blah? And so I vetoed 68 of them that I thought were growing government. I'm always going to be for limited government. Get government out of our lives. Let's believe in the free markets. So I vetoed 68 bills. Probably should have vetoed more. But, you know, the way this thing works, and when they override my veto, nobody cares. Nobody knows really, right? People in rural Oklahoma, they're like, way to go, Governor. You should veto every bill, right? Because we don't need more rules and regulations and all this stuff and more government giveaways. But the bill that really bothered me the most was the National Guard bill. And I think it's important that Oklahomans understand this. So there was a bill, they call it the National Guard bill, so then everybody's afraid to vote against it because you'd be anti-National Guard. I'm the Commander-in-Chief of the National Guard, and they do a lot of great work. We love the National Guard. But what this bill did is it created another pension plan. So let me give you an example. If you retire from the National Guard, let's say you're 44 or 45 and you put in 25 years, a lot of kids start at 17, 18, 19 in the National Guard. So let's say you're 42 or 43 or 44, you put in 25 years. Well, remember you're a part-time soldier. You do 1 week in a month and you did 2 weeks in the summer, okay? And then you earn a retirement after 25 years that starts when you're 60, all right? The federal government pays that. Just like we have Social Security benefits that start when we're 62 and a half or 65. So you have this benefit that starts at 60, the federal government pays for it. What the legislature just did, I vetoed it and they overrode it, is this would mean the state would start paying that retirement benefit at 43 or 44. So we would pay for 16, 17 years until they turn 60. So now we're paying, and I'll give you an example. If you're a colonel in the National Guard, it's about a $2,800 a month benefit. And so now the state is on the hook to pay a retirement of $2,800. That's why I had problems with it, because there's not an unlimited amount of money here for us to keep paying every single. If there's an unlimited amount of money, pay me a retirement, right? Let's pay nurses a retirement. Let's pay teachers bigger retirement. Why? How can we afford to keep giving out taxpayer money over and over again? And then the fact that they held that vote open, if you'll look at it, for 5 or 6 hours, and we're twisting arms and making people switch from no to yes, okay? And that's just the stuff that I think Oklahomans, when they understand that and they start opening their eyes and understanding what these things are doing, who is that benefiting? Who ran that bill? Who benefits from it, right? Just that's the connecting the dots that I'm trying to explain. And my job is to call balls and strikes, and it's the Oklahomans' jobs to understand this and hold us accountable and hold your Senate and your House accountable.
You still have about at least 20 bills waiting on your signature. Where do things stand with those 20 bills?
Well, actually, we'll be reviewing some of those today. And so the way that works is once the legislature puts them on my desk, I think when they leave the session, it's called sine die, so their last day of session, I have 15 days to decide on those. And so we'll get those done. We've got a team of attorneys that review all those bills. And then we'll be meeting today to decide if we're going to sign them, if we're going to just let them go into law, or if we're going to veto those bills.
Okay.
And then, again, next year will be your last session in here.
Can you believe that?
I know.
It's
I
crazy.
can't believe it. I was writing all this stuff this morning, and I was like, I can't believe next year will
8
be
years.
the last year. We've
We've grown up together.
I know. Look at us. We've seen quite a few people either announce they're running or kind of rumors. If you had to choose someone right now, who would you endorse for the next governor?
Oh man, you can't put me on the spot like that. So it's too early. We don't even know who the field is. I remind people this all the time. Nobody knew who Kevin Stitt was in June of 2017. And this is the equivalent, right? About a year away from the election date, I had started to run. I was just the no-name business guy, had 2% name ID in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And so the field isn't even totally set yet. So we've got some great candidates to choose from, and Oklahomans are smart. But I'll tell you this, I believe we need a business person. We need someone with integrity. We need someone that will continue the momentum of limited government, lower taxes, and so Oklahomans are smart. They're gonna figure out the best person, and a couple of them have worked in my administration that is really going to be interesting. And then the Speaker of the House, Charles McCall, is a really good candidate and a good friend of mine, and so I'm really excited to see how this all plays out, and we've got some good choices.
What would you like to see from lawmakers in the interim? You know, what ideas should they be working on? We have interim studies coming up. What would you like to see in 2026?
You know, we've accomplished so much in my 7 years with education freedom, with lower taxes. I would love us to kind of look at some of the budgeting reforms, maybe budgeting every other year. A lot of states do that. Texas does that. So, because the problem when you budget every year and you have to pass a budget every year, we just got out of session. This fiscal year doesn't start until July 1st, and every agency is already having to plan to come back to the legislature in October and present their budget for next year. So it's just this continual cycle that raises expenses. So I would love to address some of those concerns. How does the budget process work? Used to in Oklahoma, we budgeted every other year. So let's budget 1 year. Let's maybe do policy the following year as a legislature. That's something we can think about. But what I do is I go get with some of these big time think tanks around Washington, D.C. and that are getting best practices from all these other states. And I invite them to come to Oklahoma to brief me on how can we be a more business friendly state. So those are the things that we're working on behind the scenes to come up with our legislative agenda for next year. And at the same time, my work as governor never ends because I've got to be managing the 30,000 state employees, the budgets that we have, becoming more efficient, delivering better services for Oklahomans. So those are all the things that I'm working on behind the scenes.
And then last kind of question I have for you is, it was Pro Tem Paxton and Speaker Hilbert's first year running things in this building. How do you feel like the three of you worked together? How do you feel like they did in their first year in leadership?
Yeah, I thought it was really good up until the last day. So the last day got a little contentious with the veto overrides and that kind of stuff because I was just frustrated. The thing that I always try to point out is the conflicts of interest. And that's the kind of stuff that just bothers me. And I think it bothers Oklahomans. The reason Oklahomans or reason Americans hate politicians is they can see right through the dishonesty. They can see through the conflicts of interest. In other words, if you're a pharmacist, you shouldn't be running pharmacy bills. If you're in the National Guard, you shouldn't run a National Guard bill. If you're in this industry, you shouldn't be benefiting yourself by running a bill that benefits your industry. That's the thing that people can't stand about politicians. And so the conflict of interest, I'm going to continually to push that out, and I'm going to share that with Oklahomans. I think that's why Oklahomans trust me, is because they know that I'm here as public service. I'm not here for any reason except to make Oklahoma top 10. But to answer your question directly, I think they did a good job this session. I think the fact that we got all of those things done was amazing. We can campaign on that. They can be very proud of business courts, tort reform, tax cuts. They're going to go back and they're going to hang that on their flyers when they campaign, and we're going to talk about those great things that we did. The fact that we passed 616 bills that grew government is frustrating. The fact that they overrode 48 or 47 bills that are actually going to cost taxpayers more money, that's where I get frustrated. And so it's just maybe a philosophical difference between me and some of the people in the House, the Senate, on how big government should be. But as a general rule, they're friends of mine, and we'll work together next year for my last session. And it'll be I'm sure it'll be a great session as well. But I'm really proud of this session. It was really good.
Do you feel like the ending set things on a bad foot for next session, or do you feel like that's just kind of how it goes?
First off, I wish it would have ended better. But again, I'm going to continue to call conflicts of interest when I see them. I mean, you look at the Supreme Court. They recuse themselves when there's an appearance of a conflict of interest. And for some reason, we can vote and we can pass and we can push legislation that personally benefits a legislator. And that's where I just ultimately will always call that out as a ball or a strike. And I'll point that out to Oklahomans. Do I think that we'll move on? Sure, I will. I think we'll absolutely move on. I can move on. But again, this is my last session coming up. I've accomplished so many things. We've got Oklahoma with the largest savings account. I came and did everything that I wanted to do. And we've got a few other policy items we need to get done in year 8. But we're leaving Oklahoma in a much, much better state than when I took over, and I'm so excited about that. And I'm going to be prophetic. I'm going to continue on this next year telling Oklahomans what to expect, and here's what we need to continue to do. Whether the legislature does it, as you know, I can't write the bills and sign them. And so when we point out some things that are going to help us in the future, hopefully they'll see that, and we'll get some other good legislation and good policy done this next year.